Welcome, AP Economics students. Today is day 6 of our College Board AP review, and we are going to be taking a look at a topic in microeconomics. It is probably the most substantial topic in microeconomics. It's definitely the meat and potatoes of the course. It is market structures. That's what we call it in Krugman. That's where most of the College Board calls it market structures. However, you could also hear the term product markets. That falls in the same category. It's just a different way to say it. So it's because there's two types of markets. There's product markets and there's factor markets. So some people might call it product markets, but market structures is generally what we know it to be. If you look at the bottom left-hand part of this slide, these are the different market structures. There's perfect competition, there's monopolistic competition, there is oligopoly, and there is monopoly. And the way that you know which one is which, perfect competition, many firms, it is an identical product. They have no control over price. All the other ones have at least some control. Perfect competition has no control. That's why sometimes we call it price takers. There are no barriers to entry. In theory, anybody can get involved in this product market, this market structure, and do it. And a good example would be something like agriculture. So that's perfect competition. That's the first one that we're going to go over. By the way, some textbooks might call it pure competition. Same thing. Okay. Monopolistic competition. This is when there are many firms. However, the difference between perfect competition and monopolistic competition is that products are differentiated. There is a little control over price, and there are little barriers to entry, which means that many people can do it. If you think about Denville or Rockaway, New Jersey, this might be the pizzerias, okay? There's several places that sell pizza in the Denville or Rockaway area. However, all the pizzas are different. Some people might like one particular, I like Brick 46 because of their sauce. I like Denville Pizza because of their toppings. I like M&S because of the buffalo chicken. So the products are differentiated. They're not exactly the same. We'll be going over that. Oligopoly. This is when there are a few firms. It can be a situation where the products are differentiated. It can be a situation where the products are exactly the same. So differentiated products might be cereal. If you go to the cereal aisle, there's really only 3 or 4 companies that sell cereal. However, there's many different kinds, so that's differentiated product. Or it could be something like the steel industry. There's a few players that sell steel, and steel is steel. It's the same thing. So an oligopoly, there is a little bit more control over price. There is this idea of mutual interdependence, which means that because there's so little firms, when one firm does something that impacts the other. And, so an example could be airlines, they say here, cereal, steel, those types of things. Monopoly, there's one firm that makes that particular industry. It is not product differentiated because there's only one firm doing it. They have considerable control over the price. And the situation that we have with monopolies, they are available because generally they're made into a regulated monopoly. If you take a look at like the electric company or the water company, it just is more efficient. It just makes more sense to have one. That could be a reason. Another reason could be if somebody invented a new product, maybe a new medication, a situation like that, they might have a patent over it. So that might be the other reason. Okay, so these are all the types of market structures. On this slide, it's all about perfect competition. Take a look at the general perfect competition graph. So the general perfect competition graph is always going to have a horizontal line. You can see here, there's a horizontal line, there's the horizontal line, there's the horizontal line. That horizontal line, we call it in class Mr. DARP. MR stands for marginal revenue, D stands for demand, AR stands for average revenue, P is for price. Then we always want to make sure that we have our ATC curve and our AVC curve. Notice the proper construction. We went over that in last unit. And then we have the marginal cost curve that hits at the bottom of the AVC and the ATC. And when you're studying the graphs on perfect competition, so they have that elastic demand, so it's horizontal. We always start where MR equals MC. So if this is the line where MR equals MC, that point, or it could be that point, depending on which one is your Mr. DARP, there's a few things that it can tell you. If the price is greater than the ATC, where MR equals MC, then we could say, like for example here, if the price is $18, point E is above, this is where MR equals MC, is above the ATC. That would be considered positive economic profit. In this situation, let's say it's at 14, let's draw a pretend Mr. DARP here, and where it is at point C, where it intersects, if it equals ATC, that means that the firm breaks even. That's a terminology called normal profit. We really want to make sure that we're familiar with that. And let's say that you're here at 12 at point B. So your MR equals MC, your price is below the ATC, but above the AVC. That means that you are sustaining a loss, but it doesn't mean that you should shut down. You should only shut down if you cannot cover all of your average variable costs, okay? So in the short run, we can have a situation with economic profit. We can have a situation with loss. But in the short run, those things are possible. In the long run, in perfect competition, the long run equilibrium is normal profit, break even. And that's because if you're a firm that's making in the short run some economic profit, that's going to allow other firms to enter. They're going to say, oh, other people want to make money too doing this. So they're going to enter the market. Supply is going to shift to the right. That's going to bring down price. That'll bring you here. Conversely, if you are sustaining a loss in the short run, and then by the time it comes to make a decision, hey, we lost money doing this, we're going to leave the industry, we're going to close the business, we're going to shut down in the long run, supply is going to decrease, there's less firms doing it, which means that the price will go up, and that'll get you into long run perfect competition. So this is perfect competition. This is what the perfect competition graph looks like. I really think that on the exam, you would definitely need to explain what goes on, the shifts, the short run, the long run, etc., etc. The other type, so on the completely other side of the coin, is monopoly graphs. Monopoly is the complete opposite of perfect competition. It's black and white, hot and cold, okay? As you can notice with monopoly graphs, the demand curve is downward sloping, and the marginal revenue curve starts and then gets farther and farther away, and the marginal revenue curve can actually be negative. Okay, and as we see here, we always start where MR equals MC. We bring that all the way to the top, and that's how we get the monopoly profit. Now, if you were to take a look at, for example, what would the surplus be in that situation? When you're operating with a monopoly, obviously the monopoly profit would be the producer surplus, the area above would be the consumer surplus, and then the area to the right here is deadweight loss. Deadweight loss means economic activity that could have happened if price was not above the marginal cost. Okay, so when we take a look at ways that we would try to, let's say, regulate the monopoly, that would be to either charge the price at where average total cost is or where marginal cost is, then that would turn this entire thing into the consumer surplus. Okay. One thing that you need to know that they might ask you is about price discrimination. Because monopolies have a lot more control over price, they can assign prices to different groups. So, for example, in this situation, let's say that this is, the only movie theater in town. It's a monopoly, and they have prices for seniors, for regular people and for senior citizens. So those two prices, the reason why they have different prices is senior citizens have a different willingness to pay than working adults. So the two different prices are there, and you are maximizing your profit in that situation. In this situation here, you can see that what if you split it into three? Okay, this is going to be the price for working age adults. This is going to be the senior citizen price, and this is going to be the children price. As you can see, the more that you price discriminate, the more green that fills up this triangle, which means that A, consumer surplus decreases because people are getting a lot closer to their willingness to pay, and B, the profit is going to increase. Okay, so that is that situation with monopolies. With oligopolies, now, if someone were to ask you to draw a graph for a monopoly, the oligopoly graph looks the exact same as the monopoly. However, in many years, we have not been asked to draw a monopoly graph, but an oligopoly graph. But what we do tend to do is to use game theory, because we know that in an oligopoly, because there's not that many firms, when one firm makes a decision, that impacts the other firm. So in this particular example, the Battle of the Cuteness, we have the Hudson Company and the Kepler Company. And the idea is which one is going to advertise, which one is not going to advertise, is it worth it? Okay, so in order for Hudson to advertise and Kepler to advertise to be the dominant strategies, which would equate to the Nash equilibrium, the following must be true. A must be greater than E. So advertising is a better choice than not advertising here if Kepler does. And C must be greater than G. So that means that regardless of what Kepler does, it makes sense for Hudson to advertise. If this number is greater than this number, and this number is greater than this number, then Hudson advertising is a dominant strategy. If you were saying, what about Kepler? Well, if Kepler advertises, sorry about the typo there, if B is greater than D, so Kepler advertising is better than here. So regardless if Hudson advertises or not, it's a better. And then here, if F is greater than H, so again, regardless of what Hudson does, if this number is greater than this number and this number is greater than this number, then we know that the dominant strategy is for Hudson to advertise and for Kepler to advertise. In order for Hudson to advertise and to Kepler to advertise to be the Nash equilibrium, only the following must be true. A must be greater than or equal to E, and B must be greater than or equal to D. That is if we determined that this would be the best option for both. So that's the difference between dominant strategy is, it always is going to work that out that way. Nash equilibrium, it might be, okay, maybe Hudson has a dominant strategy, but Kepler doesn't. You would follow the lead at the dominant strategy and then move on from there. And we're going to see some examples of that because I definitely think that that is going to be featured on your exam. The last type of market structure is monopolistic competition. Again, drawing of the graph is not too different from what we are used to. It absolutely resembles a monopoly graph. We have your downward sloping demand curve, your downward sloping marginal revenue curve. It's always where MR equals MC. So notice how here's where we found MR equals MC. We bring that all the way up to the demand curve. And then this is our profit, because that's the cost, that's the price. That box is the profit. It is possible if the ATC is above the demand curve, like it is in this situation. Here's MR equals MC. That's going to be the price that we can charge. That's what the costs are. That's the loss. Now, what you need to know is that in monopolistic competition, having economic profit and having loss is a short run situation. In the long run, this is what a monopolistic competition graph looks like. And it's the same idea. Since there aren't any, very few, if little at all, barriers to entry, if there is somebody like a yogurt land or like a pizzeria that is sustaining a lot of economic profit, what is going to happen? But more firms are going to enter the industry. And if more firms enter the industry, let's say that this is Yogurt Land is making crazy economic profit. If other places in Denville or in Rockaway or in Morris Plains at the mall, if they open yogurt places, the demand for Yogurt Land is going to go down. Notice how on the when we have people enter the yogurt market, the demand curve shifts to the left, but so does the marginal revenue curve. It's almost like these are chopsticks that are attached together. So if you're going to shift the demand curve, you're shifting the marginal revenue curve at the same situation. So it's almost like in monopolistic competition, the industry behavior is within the graph. See, in perfect competition, we have its own supply and demand curve for the industry. And monopolistic competition, because it's individualized, it's not a price taker, that demand curve and that marginal revenue curve, that is what serves as what happens when people enter and exit the market, and they go in the same direction. If they exit, so let's say, for example, that a bunch of yogurt places are losing a ton of money in the short run and they don't want to, what is going to happen in that situation is the demand for the place that has it is going to go up. Okay, so demand is going to shift to the right, and marginal revenue is going to follow that for it. Okay. Okay. So that is monopolistic competition. Let us move on. Here are some key and confusing topics. I'm going to give you a second to look at that. Okay. If we take a look at some of these key confusing topics, let's start with perfect competition. Mr. Darf shows that this is a horizontal line and that this is a price taker. There is a separate industry supply and demand curve, and many times you would be asked to draw a side-by-side graph. You might need to explain it, that sort of situation. AP exam questions give you a scenario, usually about profit, cost, and revenue at a specific output. Drawing it, sketching it out, even if it's not a requirement, I highly recommend doing so. When you're doing anything with long run repercussions, do one step at a time. Then take a look at the short run effects on your page. And do remember that in perfect competition, really in any cost curves, fixed cost is irrelevant to the firm's optimal short run production decision. That is because those fixed costs can't be changed until the long run. So think about that, where that ABC is, because that's what we're looking for. People get confused now, moving on to the next market structure. with monopolistic competition. Many firms, low barriers to entry, but this is differentiated products. So because they're differentiated products, M&S has the greatest buffalo chicken pizza, or you really like the ice cream at Denville Dairy, whatever. Because of that, we have some price setting power with the downward sloping demand curve, the downward sloping marginal revenue curve. The monopolistic competition, the oligopoly, monopoly, if you were to draw the graph, they look exactly the same. So monopoly and monopolistic competition, we set the same structure, very good. Do realize that when we are in long run equilibrium in monopolistic competition, that ATC hits the demand curve at one point. We call that the point of tangency. Okay. And whenever you're talking about monopolistic competition, oligopoly, or monopoly, they are allocatively inefficient in the short and the long run, because anytime price goes over marginal cost, and that might be the question, why isn't this allocatively efficient? That's because price is always greater than marginal cost. So that's what makes perfect competition allocatively efficient, and monopolistic competition, oligopoly, and monopoly, not so much. In oligopoly, when you start seeing terms like mutual interdependence, price leadership, that's an oligopoly question. It's probably with game theory. Game theory is when there is those a situation where they have the box, several boxes. There's an equilibrium. There's possibly a dominant strategy. And again, the way to get good at that is a lot of practice. Okay. So we talked about Nash equilibrium. One of the big things that you need to know with monopolistic competition and oligopoly is that advertising is a way to prove your product differentiation and how to respond to competitors. Okay. In Monopoly, past AP exams have asked questions about why Monopoly's marginal revenue is below its price. Make sure that you have to explain. So essentially, they're saying, why is the marginal revenue curve below the demand curve? And the reason is that in order to sell more, you have to lower its prices on all units sold in order to sell more units. So, okay, if I'm going to go from selling 10 units to 15 units, the demand curve says at 10, I could charge $20, but at 15, I can only charge 18. Now I'm lowering all of those other prices to match that 18 price instead of that $20 price. There have been questions that ask about consumer surplus, producer surplus, and deadweight loss when it is regulated. Remember that at a regulated price equal to ATC is the lowest price that would not cause the firm to take losses and eventually close, and that would obviously increase the consumer surplus. And perfectly price discriminating monopolist, if you charged every single person, like if you knew in their brain what their top willingness to pay would be, that would be produce an efficient quantity, and that would make it so that there wasn't a deadweight loss. Of course, that's a theory and something that's very challenging to do in practice. Here is a practice-free response question from, I believe, 2011. Assume that the market for avocados is perfectly competitive. So again, this should be an alarm that goes off in your head. In this introduction part, they're going to tell you what market structure we're working with. The typical firm is earning positive economic profit in short-run equilibrium. Now I need to, A, draw a correctly labeled graph for the typical firm, illustrating the short-run equilibrium and labeling the equilibrium market price and output PE and QE respectively. Well, I know that this is perfect competition. It's going to be Mr. Darp. I know I got my marginal cost. I know I'm going to have my ATC. And I know that if I need to demonstrate positive economic profit, that where MR equals MC, I'm going to want to make sure that my Mr. Darp is above that for ATC. So if we take a look here, here's our original marginal cost curve. Here is our Mr. Darp, and here is our ATC. So this is where those guys are going to, where they intersect. This is the cost, so that entire box is the profit. Okay, disregard the shift for the next part because that's in the picture as well. So that's all you need to do for letter A. For letter B, assume that there is an increase in market wage rate for labor, which is a variable input. Show on your graph in part A the effect of the wage increase on the marginal cost curve in the short run. So because this happens, this is actually going to shift our marginal cost curve to the left. This will be our new MR. This will be our new MR equals MC. So that would be the different with the profit maximizing quantity. Then they say, assume that avocado producers hire workers from a perfectly competitive labor market, draw a graph of labor supply and demand for the typical firm, and label the supply curve MFC and the demand curve MRP. Assume that market wages increases from W1 to W2, show the effect of the wage increase on the graph, labeling the initial QL1 and the new QL2. So here's my original. MFC1, MRP, there is our quantity. And now that we are increasing, so my supply curve is going up, that shows the decrease in the quantity of labor. Is this a graph that we draw a lot of the time? No, but you should be at least a little familiar with taking a look at this when discussing. This is kind of how they try to put factor markets and market structures, product markets in the same type of question. Okay? I thought it would be really important to do an oligopoly type question. Two bus companies, Roadway and Rankin Wheels, operate a route from Greensboro to Spring City, transporting a mix of passengers and freight. They must file their schedules with local transportation board each year and cannot alter them during the year. So once you're in, you're in. Those schedules are revealed only after both companies have filed. Each company must choose between an early and a late departure. The relevant payoff matrix appears below, with the first entry in each cell indicating Roadway's daily profit and the second entry in each cell indicating Rankin Wheels' daily profit. So here we have a situation, ladies and gentlemen, with early, late, early, late. So the first part is and what I would actually do, like if I were drawing this, if like I had a piece of paper in front of me, I would actually write that this would be Roadway and that this would be Rankin. So like maybe RORA, RORA, just to so I wouldn't get confused. In which market structure do these firms operate? You needed to say that this market is an oligopoly. There's only two firms, and we know that it's an oligopoly because if one firm makes a decision, it directly impacts the other one. So, you don't have that in monopolistic competition and perfect competition because there are so many firms that if somebody goes out of business or somebody sets a particular price, it's not really going to affect you all that much. If Roadway chooses an early departure, which departure time is better for Rankin Wheels? So the correct answer, Rankin Wheels will choose a early departure as well. Okay, so as we could see here, if Roadway chooses the early departure, Rankin Wheels can either choose early or late. 900 is greater than 850 every time, so that would be the answer in that situation. Identify the dominant strategy for Roadway. Roadway's dominant strategy is early departure. Why? Well, if you take a look at Roadway's situation, when Roadway chooses early, 1,000 is greater than 750. So when Rankin chooses early, it makes a lot of sense for Roadway to do it because 1,000 is greater than 750. If Rankin chooses late, Roadway would still be better off choosing early because 950 is greater than 700. So this number for Roadway compares to this number for Roadway, and this number for Roadway compares to this number. And since in both situations, regardless of what Rankin Wheels does, Roadway makes more money if they choose early, then they have a dominant strategy. Is it possible that that they always have a dominant strategy? No. Okay. But in this situation, it is. Is choosing an early departure a dominant strategy for Rankin wheels? Explain. So, what you needed to say here is that early departure is not a dominant strategy for Rankin wheels because if Roadway chooses a late departure, Rankin wheels is better off choosing. Uh, Rankin Way is better off choosing a late departure. If you take a look at Rankin wheels, okay, and you compare them, if Rankin wheels goes early, it makes sense. 900 is greater than 850, but it doesn't make sense if this is what happens to Roadway because 650 is not greater than 800. So Rankin would lose out in this situation. It would be better for them to choose late. So that's why they don't have a dominant strategy. Again, if you had this like on a piece of paper, I would write it down because it's very confusing to get Rankin and Roadway confused. If both firms know all the information in the payoff matrix but do not cooperate, that means that they don't call each other and make deals. What will be Rankin Wheels' daily profit? Rankin Wheels' daily profit would be 900. Why is that? Because we know that Roadway has a dominant strategy, that Roadway is going to choose early. Okay, so Roadway is either going to be at 1,000 or either going to be at 950. So they're going to be here. And if Rankin knows their information, they know that Roadway is going to choose early. So for them, what's better, 900 or 850? 900. So that would be the Nash equilibrium in that particular situation. I hope you enjoyed this little discussion on market structures. If you have any questions, please feel free to let me know. I hope you have a great day.